So we got through the first 4 days, and some of you in the back, this is like super hard to read. So we got day 1, we have day and night, and you notice that the day was good. Day 2, we got the sky, nothing about it being good. Day 3, we got land and sea, which were good. And then we got this bonus, and God said, which resulted in some green stuff, and the green stuff is also good. And now we have day 4, and we talked about how like all of this first 3 days seem to be about God addressing the formlessness of creation. That's the unordered chaos in a blender that seemed to be existent in verse 2. And now we've got definite structure here. We've got something to work with now. And so now starting with day 4, we have all these connections back to day 1, and it seems rather than creating new space in day 4, he's now filling the space that he previously made in the first 3 days. And so we get the sun and the moon and the stars. And these are all, again, they're said that this is good stuff, which is interesting, because one of the things that's said about, I don't know if you caught this, with all the weird, lights in the sky language, but it said that the purpose of these lights is to do what? Did you notice? Like, what are they for?
Give light to the earth.
Well, we have light, though, already. We kind of already have light. So, but it's something actually more specific than just light. The sun rules over the day, and then the moon rules over the night, but like, we'll go back and look at the text. There's something in there. So that's okay. You skipped over it, because there's a lullaby effect. We know this story so well that we miss the details, and the details are important. There's something else. It's not about light. It's not about authority. Count time. Yeah, there's this sentence. Did you catch it? Go back and look. There's a whole sentence in there. And this is a really short story. So, the author isn't just trying to fill up a word count. Like, it's very sparing in details. Like, I'd like to know a lot more about what separating light from darkness that are blended together looks like. Not going to tell us that. But it spends the time in the word count to tell us that the purpose of these things is for being able to figure out what time it is, what season it is, and what day it is in the year. And that this is a good thing. Like the sun, moon, and stars are going to be really good at helping somebody figure out what day it is and what time it is. Now, the question, if we've been playing the game of like, who is this stuff, like why is some things good and some things not? Like, who could this be good for? Like, that list should be shrinking as we go along. Because how many beings in creation is it really helpful? Like, they need stars to be able to figure out what time of year it is. It's not my Australian Shepherd. She does not care what the stars look like in the sky. She always knows. So like, who could that be helpful to? So that's interesting. So now, if we're playing the what happens next game, and this is really the grid, so what would we expect to happen now on day 5 based on what we saw on day 4? What should be getting filled up on day 5 if this next 3 is going to be about filling what's already been, the space that's been created? What should get filled up on day 5?
Land or sea.
Sky, because day 2 is sky. So eventually the land and sea, like I would expect, and I could be wrong, we'll go and see. We'll look at the text. I would expect that land and sea should get filled up on day 6. And that 5 should be about filling up the sky with stuff, which is different than this expanse above the sky, which is the sun, moon, and stars. Because again, they have this idea that there's a sky, and then there's like a sky above the sky. And actually that there's a sky above even that, like that goes beyond where the sun, moon, and stars. Like there's another sky even further away than that. And that's where God's throne is. That's like the third sky or the third heaven. But yeah, this is just the sky that's between the clouds and the land and the sea. So what does the text say? So, and God said,
let the waters swarm with swarms of living beings, and let flying things fly above the land across the canopy of the sky. Oh, that's from Death's Day 2 language. And God, this is this awesome sentence that like brings up so many questions that don't get answered. And God fattened the great dragons. So your translations probably don't say dragons, do they? Says literally dragons, but you know. And every living being that moves. And the reason why your translations don't, it's not like they just think, well, they said dragons, but ancient people didn't know any better, and it's just like the whales or something. But the word is dragons, so I'm going to put dragons there. So there's great dragons and every living being that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged flying thing according to its kind. And God said it was good. And again, if we're playing what happens next, what should happen after God saw it was good? If it was going to be exactly like day 2, what would be there? Yeah, we would expect this line. There's evening, there's morning, 5th day. But now we got another God speaking, but it's a different kind of speaking. Because before he was speaking like, hey, light, exist. Hey, like on day 2, hey, waters, you need to separate. Right? And it's to inanimate things, you know, whatever. But now he says this, get this, first time we see this word, blessed. God blessed something. And he blesses, what does it mean to bless? Is it something we say when people sneeze? What does that even mean? God blessed them. In the Hebrew word, barakah, same word in Arabic, the idea that it conveys is it's like a generous gift from someone that's in a high station to someone who is in a lower station than them. So it's like this kind of almost like kingly gift of generosity. And so God is giving them, and who's the them? It's these swarming things, right? There's stuff in the water. And like, so, well, I thought like, oh, surely there'd just be the sky. And we do get birds, right? But we also get like fish plus, you know, all the other stuff like dragons and things that are in the water so that we don't know about. Which, oh, that's right, because how did they get the sky? How did God get the sky? He had to separate water. So there was water too. The water was already there. He didn't create it. But we do have this kind of sky that's in between, you know, water and water. So I guess there was water on day 2. I kind of forgot about that, but God didn't. And so he put stuff in the water too. So we got stuff in the water. We got stuff in the sky. We got these fish and these birds. And they're good. God likes them. He even likes, like he likes the dragons. Like he made them fat. Like how did they get fat? Because God fattened them. God gave the dragons good stuff to make them healthy and strong. So, and like, what does that mean for like an ancient person? There's dragons. So like people understood that like the sea, like the oceans are these wild, chaotic, scary places. And a lot of ancient people imagined like they were full of dragons and these monstrous things. Some people even worshipped their conception of these kinds of beings that were like the embodiment of everything that was there before day 1, like the darkness and the deep sea that's not good for humans. Like they saw the dragons as kind of the embodiment of that. And some of them worshiped them out of awe. Some worshiped them out of fear. Or they worshiped other gods that would keep them safe from the dragons. But in this story, these great dragons that other tribes and peoples, when this was written, worship and are terrified of, to God they're just like a little pet. He feeds them. He makes them fat. Good dragon. Go sleep now. Like that's saying something. That's actually making, like we think this is a weird sentence, but to an ancient person, this is again saying something really profound and unique about the God of the Bible. That the scariest Godzilla monster you can imagine coming out of the sea is nothing more than a little pet. It's no different in God's eyes to the sparrow flying in the air. They're both just little swarming things that he made and filled his creation with. They're not so scary to him. And so God says they're good, and then God gives them, get a big plus here, he gives them a blessing. He didn't bless any of this other stuff, so there's something special about the fish and the birds that makes them different than the sun, moon, and stars, or the green stuff that's on the land, or anything else. There are beings that are capable of receiving a gift from God. And this is God's gift. Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the land. And then we get and there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And so these living creatures are really special to God. They're not, for some reason, we're just going to play detective and try to understand who this God is that we're reading about in this book. For some reason, these creatures are really special to him. They're in a different category than everything else we've seen thus far. And they can be recipients of God's blessing. And his blessing to them is he just wants more of them. He just wants as many of them as they can make of themselves. And the ability to make more of themselves is in itself a gift. It's a gift from the Creator to be able to create, to procreate. And the biblical author wants us to think about procreation in that way, that this is an amazing, miraculous gift from God. It is a generous gift from heaven to be able to do this. And it's one that he gave first to these animals in the sky and in the water. Okay. So then, again, day 3, what would we expect? What happens next? If we had land, sea, and green stuff on day 3, what happens on day 6? What are we going to see? Land creatures. I would expect to see the land creatures finally. Let's get some land creatures on this creation. And let's see. Okay. And what else would you might expect? If this is really a pattern, and I'm really following closely like an attentive reader, not only would I expect land creatures, I would also expect, how God speaks twice in day 3. I wonder if we're going to get a big bonus edition day 6, because it's the second set of 3, it's the second, third day. We have the third day twice. So I'm just wondering if we'll get kind of a double portion of something. So let's see. So then God said, let the land bring forth living beings. It's the land, right? We're good. According to their kind, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the land according to their kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the land according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the humus. You might think that's a weird, why does he say humus? There's a reason why I use that particular word to translate the Hebrew word. Because it's a word for soil in Hebrew that sounds like the word for human in Hebrew. And so humus, human. So you kind of you're going to see the word play later. According to its kind. None of this kind, before on day 3, we had the seed everywhere. Now it's kind. And God saw that it was good. Okay, so we got animals, plus, insects, whatever. And this is also good. All right. And God said, oh good, we got another and God said. Just like on day 3, now on day 6, we get a double God said. And so before it was, God made land and sea, and then he added the green stuff. So the animals are kind of filling the land that's come out of the sea, right? They're kind of serving that purpose of just filling that space with life and things that can self-replicate, we'll see, just like the fish and the birds. And so whatever comes next, if this is really comparing, we're supposed to compare what comes next to the green stuff, to the trees. What? Just tuck that away. So then God said, let us make humanity, and that's a proper name, Adam, humanity, in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky from day 5, and over the livestock and over all the land and over every creeping thing that creeps on the land from this day 6. And then we get this little poem. It's the first poem in the Bible when you're just kind of reading through it. And it's just a simple 3-line, I think it's only like 6 or 8 words total in the Hebrew. And it says, and God fattened the human in his own image. In the image of God, he fattened him. Well, that's kind of cute, just saying the same thing. Male and female, he fattened them. Okay, so first of all, poems in the Bible. When you're reading a story, and you can usually tell a good translation will take poetry, when the language switches from prose to poetry, it will like indent it or do something to offset it in the text. And those of you with translations right now where it's done that, good for those translators. It's good to know when the writer is switching to poetry. Why would you do that when you're telling a story? Why would I tell you a story and then suddenly switch to poetry for 3 lines and then go back to telling you a story again? Why would I do that? The reason is, one reason could be that we read poetry differently than we read narrative. When you read, how many of you like read for fun, like just read fiction? Yeah, I do too. And like sometimes if it's like a good story, you get into it. Like if you're like me, you're just like blowing through it. It's exciting. You're interested, you want to see what happens next. Good narrative always leaves you wondering like what's going to happen next, right? How many of you read poetry? Quite a few. That's impressive. Do you read poetry like that? How fast can I read through Robert Frost? Absolutely not, somebody said. That's like a sin. Like literally, you're missing the mark. You're missing the point. The point of poetry actually is to read it slowly. Poetry uses, deep metaphors and descriptive language. Often, like really good poetry will take kind of descriptive language that don't normally go together in your mind and put them together to cause you to like experience or see or feel something in a new way. It really plays with language in a unique way that you really don't generally with narrative. So poetry has to be read slowly. And so what poems do in the biblical narratives is they act like stop signs or yellow lights. Like slow down, stop, take a look around you. Let's see where we are. What's going on? Are you okay? Did you catch what you just passed? That's what the poems are doing a lot of times. And so the reason why the author has to put a poem right here is because there's something amazing that just happened and we can get so caught up, oh yeah, finally humans, and here we go, and go right on to the next thing. And he's like, no, slow down. There is something profound that has just been said, and you, dear reader, really need to stop and sit and think about this. And so let me tell you what I just said up here again in a little poem that you have to sit and think about. And you notice there's a game being played in the poem. So you have 3 things. One of these things is not like the other. Which one is it? Which line is not like the other? The third one. Because God fattened the human in his own image, and it's just the human. How many humans? One. One human. The human. In the image of God, he fattened him. So how many humans is it? It's just one. Male and female, he fattened them. Wait a second. How many are there? Why is the poet confused? How many humans are there? Is there one or is there 2? Is there one or is there 2? Is humanity, because he said, let's go back and, okay, I need to look back at what this stop sign just told me to stop and look at. Let us make humanity. Is humanity one? Or is humanity more than one? Is humanity one thing? How many humanities are there? I'm not talking about discipline in like university. I'm talking about like literal humanity. How many humanities are there on the planet? One, right? There's one human race, we say, right? So one humanity. So humanity is just one person then? No, humanity is more than one person, but humanity is one thing. So what does it mean to make humanity in our image? So God is one, right? But is he just one person? There's a lot of stuff happening here, and we don't have time to like go deeper into it, but I'm just going to like leave that for you to sit and think about it, to sit and think about the relationship and what's happening there, and to ask the question that at this point in the story, the text isn't telling us who's the our, who's the we. Who is speaking? Well, it's God speaking, but who is he? Why is he speaking on behalf of a group? Who's that group with him? That he's saying our and we. So just think about that. Okay. So we got animals, and then the bonus, God said on day 6, is humanity. And humanity is really special. Made on the same day as animals, but made not made with the animals. You know, there's like a break. There's a separate God said. So, and this is the thing that we don't want to miss. It could be really easy, and even today we're very tempted to do this. We just want to lump humanity into the animal kingdom. That we're just another kind of animal. We're just a little different, maybe a little special, whatever. We have some unique attributes, whatever that makes us cool. But according to this story that we're being told, there's something humanity has in common with the animal kingdom what the green stuff has in common with the land and the sea. Like they're not the same category. They go together. They inhabit the same space, but there's something very, very different about them. And it's really intriguing to me that there's something about humanity and green stuff that are being paralleled, and we're asked to like put these two things together. But what do we think is going to happen next? Let's keep moving. What do we expect is going to happen? So God's just he also actually hasn't made him yet. He's about to make him. And we know that the animal kingdom, that's good. What do we think is going to happen now? God probably going to get something, and then God made him. And then probably God's going to say that they're good. And great. And then we're done with the day. That's what we would expect to happen if we're just following the pattern so far. Oh, but they get blessed. They get blessed. Just like the fish and the birds got blessed. Now humanity's getting this blessed. And he says, be fruitful and multiply. He said that same thing to the birds. But then he says, fill the land and subdue it. And that subdue word, it's really like to conquer. Like take it over, like have control over it. It's like, and it goes on to say, and have dominion over the fish and the birds and every living thing that moves on the land. So all these other stuff, the animal kingdom, the birds, the fish, like humanity is going to have dominion over all of it. Everything, look, and then he says, and behold, he goes more, I have given you every plant. So this is also part of the blessing, by the way. So the blessing is they're going to get fruitful, multiply, okay. They're going to fill the land. They're going to conquer it and have rulership over all these living creatures. And he's even given them the green stuff. I'm giving you the green stuff, the every plant yielding seed, every tree with its seed, all this like again, seed language. Every beast, you shall have it for food, and every beast of the land, and every bird of the sky, and everything that creeps on the land, everything that has a breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. So this green stuff now becomes the food for like everybody from day 5 and 6. What are they going to eat? They're going to eat from the green stuff. And God saw everything that he made, and it was good? No, actually it says he saw everything that he had made, and it was very good. It's meod tov. So very, very, so it's like a big, like this is really good. And so, what has this all been good for? It seems to be, now that we have humanity, everything's like really, really good. It seems like this has been about humanity from the beginning. And as we look back and we realize, oh yeah, day, that's really good for humans. Night, not so helpful. Sky, just a big sky, water world with a clear sky. Not great for humans. No wonder God didn't call it good. He can't put humans on that world. But now we have land. Oh, that's good. We need to have boundaries between land and sea. Humans need land. Green stuff, well, now we know why green stuff was so good, because humans are going to eat it. Sun, moon, and stars, we already talked about. It's good for knowing what time it is and where you are and all of this stuff. Humans are going to need that. So that's really good. Birds and fish and animals. Well, we already know humanity is going to be ruling over them, ruling over these animal kingdoms. And so these are all been good. This has all been a gift, part of the building of this great gift for humanity. And it's very good. And if we actually count up how many times God said that this all was good, we get 1, 2, 3, actually one, this is actually one good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times he says it's good. That's interesting because 7's like this number in Hebrew that represents like completion or fullness. So like it really is very good. Like it is completely good. And it's completely good for humans. And so now we have the 6th day, and so now we're done. Like that's it. That's the story's finished. Right? And then, yeah, and so the sky and the land and all of their multitudes are finished. Okay, done. We're done. We're done with the story. And on the 7th day, wait, why do we have a 7th day? There's no room on my perfect little grid here for a 7th day. Why is the author messing with us now? Why are we tacking on? Why do we need a bonus day? What's left? Why do we have a day 7? What in the world? We don't need a day 7. What are we missing? So it says, on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested from the 7th day from all his work that he had done. That seems redundant. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, or made it set apart special, because on it, God rested from all of his work of fattening that he had done. And then it says these are the generations of the sky and the land when they were fattened, which would bring us right back, like bookending with the very first line of chapter 1. But okay, I want to pay attention to these 2 sentences here. So, did God work on the 7th day? That's a question. Some people are shaking their heads. Are you not sure? Did God work on the 7th day? But he finished his work on the 7th day. So was he working on the 7th day or not? Seriously, this is like a contradiction that people have noticed for thousands of years and like have been frustrated by. Like really brilliant people have sat and studied this their whole lives to answer the question, was he working on the 7th day or not working on the 7th day? Because the first sentence seems to be that he was working on the 7th day and got finished during the 7th day. And then the very next sentence said he made it holy because he had rested from all his work on the 7th day. So what did he do? Did God make anything? Did God make anything on the 7th day? And a really brilliant medieval Jewish rabbi scholar said, yes, he did make something. Do you know what he made? He made rest. How many of you think that's a cop-out answer? He made rest. And so, some people would see that and say, that's baloney. How can you make rest? How can you invent rest? But this particular scholar said, no. This isn't the kind of rest you think. This is an active rest. It's not a passive rest. What does that mean? So what this person recognized is like creation and creativity, like the act of creation can be a really, really good thing until it suddenly isn't. You can actually destroy something through creation out of control. We call that's what cancer is. Cancer is when cells are multiplying that shouldn't, and they don't know how to stop. And so it actually takes an active action, active step to put the brakes on and say, stop. No more. Enough. And what the author of Genesis 1 is saying to us in this story is that this is not just a God who knows how to create and can create anything and knows what's good and specifically what's good for humans and seems to really like humans and has made us in some way like him in a way that's totally different from anything else that he has made so far in this story. He's not only a God of creativity and creation, but he's a God who knows when to say enough. He knows when to stop creating. Because if you can imagine like an artist painting a painting, imagine you're painting a painting And be of anything, maybe the landscape out there, your favorite relative, your dog, whatever. But imagine you're painting the painting, but you never stop painting. You just keep putting more and more on the canvas, and more and more and more and more and more. Pretty soon you're going to destroy your painting. There's two ways to destroy a world. One is through what we think of as like destruction, the flood, and all that. And we'll get to that story, but we won't. But you'll get to that story if you keep reading the text and see what that looks like. This is the other way that you could destroy a world. To just never let go and let it be. And in fact, the word that's used for work in this little sentence here is that God finished his work. You know, how many times it's repeated. He finished his work. He rested from all his work. He blessed the name of holy because he rested from all his work. This work that's used 3 times here. There's two words for work, common words for work in Hebrew. One has to do with kind of physical, like manual labor. It comes from the same root that the word for slave or servant comes from. And then there's another word for work that comes from the same word for king or royal messenger. And it's that word for work that God's resting from. It's not like just brute force physical activity like we tend to think of what Sabbath rest is. It's actually rest from the kind of authoritative, controlling, hands-on, like mentally engaged kind of work. It's the kind of tinkering kind of a work. And that's what God is choosing on this day. He's like, I'm going to create a stop point. Like, this is no more. I'm not going to tinker with it anymore. I'm not going to do anything more with it. You know, it is what it is now. And I'm not removing myself from this space. Actually, you know, if we're paying attention to this, if we're actually reading this story from a real, like an ancient Middle Eastern person's eyes, this isn't like a story of God like making a little world and then walking away from it. This looks like a story of a God building a temple for himself out of his own creation and getting ready to move in. But what he said is, I'm done with the renovations. I'm not going to put up any more walls. The ceiling's height is where they are. Everything is as it should be. I'm now just going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy what I've made, and I'm going to have relationship with it. Because you can't have a relationship with something you're still tinkering with. You got to have some space. You got to give it some room to breathe. And so this is a God who knows how to make space. We've seen how he knows how to make space to fill, but now he makes space for relationship and for what he's made to really exist and to be. And that's a very wise God. That shows us that God's not just powerful, but the God of the Bible is very wise, and he cares. He cares very deeply about these things that he's made, and he wants them. Like the life that he's given them and the blessing he's given, it's not frivolous. It's not meaningless. Like he actually means for his creation to enjoy what he's made. And he wants to enjoy it with them. That's amazing. I love this story. This is a good world. So this is, like when I said the 3 sentences of what's the biblical narrative, like the world is good. This is why I say that, because this first chapter is just making it abundantly clear that this world is so good and everything in it is so good, which of course should lead any of us to ask the question, what in the world happened? Because this is not what my day-to-day looks like. So what happened? And that's what the rest of Genesis 2 and 3 is answering then that question of what happened. And hopefully, is there any hope to get back to something like this? Right? Okay, so here we go. Next little section. And you notice I kind of cut off chapter 2, verse 4 right in the middle. It's not arbitrary. I put a lot of thought into why I did that based on the language I saw in the Hebrew. Putting where the verses are is tricky stuff, and I wouldn't have wanted to have had that job, because the actual text, when you look at the original text, there's no punctuation. Like it's just all like run on, and you got to look for clues in the language to figure out when a thought ends. But my personal best guess is, because of the language that's used here at the first half of the verse, is exactly the kind of language that's used only in Genesis 1 and nowhere else, that it really belongs with this section. And then this next half of the verse, because it uses, this is the first time we see the name Yahweh in the text, that this is really part of the next story where this is the only way that God is referred to. Because in this first story, it was just God, Elohim. But now it's Yahweh, Elohim, Yahweh, Elohim. So this is a different narrative, a different perspective, if you would say, like, that we have, 4 different, perspectives on the life of Jesus in the Gospels. Well, in Genesis, we have 2 different perspectives on how the world got made. And they look very different in some ways, and they're also the same. And so it's a thing where we have to compare and contrast and try to see what looking at these 2 different perspectives that are mirroring each other in some ways on how the world is made, like how they have dialogue with each other. Okay, so here we go. On the day that Yahweh God made the land and the sky, and no bush of the open country was yet in the land, and there was no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, for Yahweh God had not caused it to rain on the land, and humanity wasn't present to serve the humus. See, so you can see the wordplay, humanity and humus, haha. And a mist was going up from the land, and it was watering the whole face of the humus. So let's stop right there. So this creation story, this is like creation version 2. Like first one we had like water world, right? Deep sea and darkness. What does this world look like? Like before actually we get the mist even, it's like a desert, isn't it? Like there's nothing green, it's land, we got land, but there's no green stuff, right? There's no rain, like it's total drought, complete drought. And there's no humanity there, so like, and the humanity wasn't there to serve the humanity, to serve the humus. Like, what is that about? I thought we're supposed to be ruling the planet, not serving the soil. What's up with that? We'll see. And then there's this mist or a flow is really what it says in the Hebrew. That's sort of like coming up and kind of making the ground wet, making this desert wet. But it's okay, we have these 2 totally different pictures of the world in kind of the very, very beginning state. Dark water world or desert. These look like why? Why are we starting at different spots? What do these 2 things have in common? Do they have anything in common? What does a desert have with a deep, dark ocean? What do they have in common? Uninhabitable. Can you live in the desert with no water? Can you live in the water with no land or anything, right? Like both are going to kill you. Maybe one will kill you a little faster. Maybe not if you're a strong swimmer. But like, yeah, both of them both are start in a place that we would consider like uninhabitable, like not great. But God immediately in both of these stories begins to address that. And he seems to be addressing that for the sake of humanity. Like already we have humanity jumping up into the story before we've even been created. And that somehow we're supposed to be serving the soil. But God's going to water the soil first from out of the ground. And so we have what happens with soil when you start soaking it with your garden hose. What does it become? Have you ever done that? Like take your garden hose and soak your yard with it, like really soak it. Like what happens to the ground? Gets soft, and what can you do with it? Oh, you can make so many things. Make so many things. That used to be my favorite pastime when I was a kid. We just had sand inside Arabia. We didn't have any grass, so I would just soak the sand with water, and then I would sculpt things from it. And look, that's what God's doing. He likes to play the same game that I did. So he forms the human. Don't get confused with the dust. There's not a separate word in Hebrew for like dirt when it's become wet. Like it's still just dust, even if it's wet dust. So it's like a mud because we've seen that it's watered. He takes it from the humus and he sculpts it. He forms it. And then it says he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living being. So in Genesis 1, we have this same story, but it's told a lot more different. Like in Genesis 1, it just seems to be, we know God's spirit is there, his breath is, he's breathing on his planet, and his word is coming, his word's speaking, and his word's just kind of creating. And we might imagine that it's just like stuff's just materializing out of nothing, right? Like it's a very hands-off kind of a process. But just so that our imagination isn't limited to that, now we have this other story where this is a lot more intimate portrait of creation. This is very hands-on. God is literally getting his hands dirty in making something. And notice, like before, all we knew was that we were made in God's image and that we are humanity and we are male and female And these are both one and more than one at the same time. But now we get this interesting picture of how we're made, that we're the coming together of the soil of the ground, this very earthy, earthbound, and also not just breath or spirit, but literally the breath or the spirit of God himself. So you have this spiritual, heavenly thing and this very earthly thing coming together into one. And the fusion of those two things is what the human is. Almost like we've got like 1 foot in the earthly world of the soil and another foot in this kind of spiritual God, breath, presence world. And that those things both together, not by themselves, but together is what makes us a living being. And for an ancient person, that thought would conjure images of like temple language. Like Genesis 1 seemed to be saying the whole creation is like a temple for God. And just like any temple, the crowning piece of architecture in the temple is, of course, the idol or the image that you put in the temple so that when you go into the temple of Zeus, how do you know it's the temple of Zeus? Well, there'll be a big statue of Zeus at some place really prominent that draws your eye. And like, okay, this is Zeus's temple. How do you know that creation is God's temple? You look and you see humanity and you say, oh, those are images of God. This is God's temple. This is the image that he put. And that's, by the way, like later God will say, I don't want you to make images of me because he's already done it. He doesn't need any help. Like, you want to make an image of God, have children. That's what the Bible is saying. But now it seems to be saying that the human being themselves is also a temple. That there's somehow this coming together, this crossing over, this overlapping between the heavenly and the earthly. And that's like, okay, that's another mind-blowing idea. And so then we go on from there, and it says, okay, and then we have this thing about God. So God planted a garden in this place called Delight, this land called Delight. So we often think that Eden, which is what translates to delight, that Eden is the garden. That's not what the text is saying. There's this whole area, so there's this whole land of this world that God's made. And then there's a part of that world that's apparently really good, so good that it's just called Delight. And then inside the boundaries of this territory called Delight, God plants this garden. So you kind of have like these kind of 3 spheres or 3 concentric circles of geographic space. Like the world, the place of delight, and then this really good place called the garden. And if that makes you think of like the 3 spheres of the temple or the tabernacle, that's probably how you should think about it. And he says in the east, which is really interesting. There's a whole thing with east and west. So in Hebrew and in like ancient Arabic, there's this idea that east isn't just like a cardinal direction. It also has like, it's a direction in time. And that's going to sound really weird to English speakers. But east is because of the sun. Like, where does the sun come from? The east. Where does it go? The west. So the west is the future. The sun's moving towards the future. It's coming from the past. So anytime you see east, yeah, it means east, but it also can mean the past. So saying he planted a garden in the east could mean a long time ago God did that. Or it could mean literally in the east of somewhere. Or it could mean both. See how cool Hebrew is? And there's no way like I couldn't do that in English. That's why I said translation is hard. Like, how do you translate that? How do you know what the author meant? Because it could be one or the other, or it could literally be both. And there's no way to say that in one word in English. Oh, well. So he puts the human there. So he puts his image like right in the center of everything. And it says, and out of the humus, Yahweh God made to spring up every tree. You notice this is like backwards. So every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. And then, in Genesis 1, what order do humans get made in the list of things that God makes in Genesis 1? Dead last. In Genesis 2, it's like we're the first thing. And now God's adding plants and, animals. See animals later. Like it's totally reversed. But I promise you it's the same story. And that's Again, the game that you're going to have to play with the Bible and like reading it and looking and saying, okay, they seem so different, but the Bible's telling us it's the same story. So what are the connecting points? Okay, keep going. Okay, and so a tree of life was in the middle of the garden, and a tree of discernment of good and bad. So we also have this. So we have all these trees, every tree, right? And so we assume that means like every tree that we can think of. But there's also apparently some trees that we might not have thought of. Like, would you have thought to ask the question before you read this, but was there a tree of life there? No. So they're going to tell us, actually there was. You may have wondered, but yeah, there really was a tree of life there. And where was the tree of life? In the center of the garden. And there was also, you may have thought, I wonder if that also included a tree of discernment. And the answer is yes, there was a tree of discernment in the garden, but where was the tree of discernment? You might, you might be tempted to say, well, it had to be in the middle of the garden. We always have this image that there's this tree of life and this tree of discernment, and there's like sitting right next to each other. But actually the text doesn't say that. It's ambiguous at best. But generally speaking in Hebrew, if you were going to say that they were both in the middle, you would have said the tree of life and there was a tree of discernment, and they were in the middle of the garden. But it says no. It gives us coordinates for the tree of life, location unclear for this one. Maybe it was there, but it's not, you can't say for sure, just looking at the text, where it was. But it was in the garden. But for sure, the tree of life is in the center. Like it is in the dead center. It is the thing, the epicenter of this whole beautiful, wonderful world is all around this tree of life. And then we get, right after that, what would be in like the Hebrew, like all of this would just be in parentheses, this whole section. Like this is the author, the narrator, giving you some backstory. Like, hey, dear reader, by the way, you should probably know there were all these rivers. And this is probably one of those places whenever you read this for the first time, you're like, who cares about the rivers? Why is this important? So we start with like a river flowed out of delight to water the garden, which is really an interesting image. Was this like the same water that God used to wet the ground to make the human, right? So there's this kind of, make it like the river of life, right? And then it divided and becomes 4 rivers. And the name of the first, and I kind of try to translate these Hebrew words as best I could. Some of them are really, like there's serious debate on how to translate them exactly, but this is my best shot. The first one is the Great Diffusion, and it's the one that flowed around the whole land of circles where there's gold. Oh, and the gold of that land, it's good. Some good gold, guys. It's not like regular gold. It's like really good gold. And there's bdellium there. You guys know what that is, right? I had to look that up. It's like this kind of resin, amber kind of stuff, sticky, like honey, but solid. And onyx stone are there. Like that's some good stuff. Great. What does that have to do with this story? And then the second river is the gushing forth. It's the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. And the third river is the sharp rapids, which flows east of Assyria. Oh, finally, someplace I've heard of. And the fourth river is the Bountiful. Okay. And then just the story just goes on from here, and like it doesn't even really talk about these rivers again. So like, what is the whole point of this? And so I'm just going to tell you, this whole story is being paralleled with another story that comes later with Noah and his sons. And this part of the story is paralleling and mirroring the 4 sons of Noah. Now wait, you say there's 3, but go back and read the text. There's one of these things is not like the other, it ends up being 4. And start looking at the sons and then comparing the sons and what the nations that come from them to these rivers, and then it's speaking something to you. That's one thing that it's doing. Another thing that it's doing is, one, it's telling us kind of where the garden is. So this river that comes out of Eden, it turns into the headwaters of 4 other rivers. Now, if you know anything about rivers, where do rivers flow from? Like if you were to follow the Missouri River all the way to its headwaters, where would you expect those to be? In a high place, like in the mountains, right? Like a lot of our rivers come from mountainous parts of the continent, and they flow all together in the Mississippi. And the same, like I was just in Sudan, And it took there's a whole long story how it took forever for them to figure out where the Nile comes from. You'd think it would be a simple thing. Like they're still debating on exactly where the Nile comes from today. Like seriously, still debating it. But it comes from high places in Ethiopia, high places in Central Africa and the Congo. And so it goes to a high place. So that tells you that this land of delight is in a high place. And if the garden is where this water is coming from, this is on a mountaintop. How many of you, when you thought about the Garden of Eden, imagined it was at the top of a mountain? But then now thinking about that, how does it change how you think about that story? And so and then the rivers, this kind of river of life that's coming out of Eden, the places it's going to. So this land of circles of that's on the way, if you know that place, you're a person 3,000 years ago reading this story, oh, I know that place. That's on the way to Egypt. Okay, yeah, and that's where there's gold, and yeah, that's why the Egyptians are so rich. And then this other place on the way to Cush, well, that's, okay, that's near Ethiopia, and then there's Assyria, and then this last river, this river that's called Bountiful, everybody knows that river. That's the river that feeds Babylon. And so, and it's funny because this one gushing forth is actually the name of the spring that's underneath Jerusalem. How many of you knew there's this amazing fountain of water that just pumps out a bazillion gallons, I don't know the real number, of water every single day just continuously, and it's under the temple in Jerusalem. I saw that last year. I was there. And I was amazed. And that's by that spring is actually where King Solomon was anointed as king over Israel. And so this is a connection to Jerusalem and then to Ethiopia, which is where a lot of the Jews fled after the destruction of the temple. And then you have Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon, which are the big enemies. Through most of the Bible story, those are the big three evil empires that want to destroy the people of God. And yet in the beginning, these groups were being fed by the same water that came out of this beautiful garden place with God. So some interesting stuff there to think about. Okay, but we're going to move on. And so God took the human and he put him, so how many humans do we have right now? Just one, okay. And just checking. And we put him in the garden of delight to serve and to guard it. Again, this is a totally different perspective because I thought when I read Genesis 1 that we're kings and queens of the world, so we just probably sit on thrones all day and we tell the birds what to do, maybe send ravens to each other, little communications, and we've got dogs pulling us around on sleds, just fun stuff. And that's what ruling the world looks like. But in this version of the story, a different perspective, which is a mirror image, it's saying actually it looks like serving and guarding a garden that belongs to God. And it's interesting because this word serve and guard, this kind of phrase, the other place that it appears, in the Torah at least, is when it talks about the job of the priests in the tabernacle or the temple, that they serve and guard the temple of God. And so this is priest language. This is someone reading this will think, oh, so the garden was like a temple, or a special temple. The whole world's a temple, but the garden's like a special temple. And the humans are acting in some kind of priestly role in this living, organic temple that God himself has made. That's interesting. And so what's his job? What's God's commanding to him? He says, God commands the human, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of discernment of good and bad you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. You will really die. Literally what it says in Hebrew is you shall die. And that's just Hebrew. When you repeat a word like that, just means it's serious, really. It's not kind of die. It's really die. So this is, and so that's God's command. So what was the first commandment God ever gave to humanity? What did you say?
Not to eat.
Not to eat of the tree. That's what I always used to say. That's we always think of it that way. That's not actually correct. That's the second command. What's the first command? Right, why do we do that? There's going to be another character in the next page who does the same thing that you just did. Well, I do it too, right? We always focus on the part that you may not, and we completely ignore the positive. God says you can eat of how many trees? Every single kind of tree. How many kinds of trees do you think there were? Who knows? But a lot. How many trees can you not eat from? Just one. Which one do we focus on? The hundreds over here or the one? And we all focus on the one. Oh, restriction on my freedom. I can't do this one thing. It's not fair. But you can have everything else except this one. Can you just say no to one thing? But that's the command. Let's keep that in mind because that'll come into play in the next page. And then Yahweh God said, it's not good. Oh, this is the first time in the story. Like God's called things good before. Lots of good, right? We got 7 goods. He never said anything was not good. Sometimes he was just kind of like, neutral. Yeah?
I actually had a question.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if this is on topic or not, but I was studying
Mm-hmm.
something in Proverbs.
Yeah.
And I also saw not good and I wondered what it meant.
Oh, yeah. So,
It says desire without knowledge is not good in the Bible. And I was
that's treasure. Hold on to that. Just hold that.
I
Hold on to it right now. We're going to pull that out in a second. That's really good. That was not revealed to you by flesh and blood. Right, so this is first time we see not good. And so everything so far in the story that's been good was good for who? Humanity, right? And it seems like, based on the world that God made on page 1 of the Bible, that God really knows what's good for us. And so, but apparently it's what's not good for humanity is that there should only be one humanity or one human in humanity. That's not good. Whatever God wants to do with humanity, it'd be really good if there was more than one. And so he says, I'm going to make him a helper to match him. And so now, again, this is like weird reverse order. I thought the animals came first and then we had humanity. But no, instead, out of the humus, so out of the same material, right? Yahweh God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them, like even the reverse order of the thing. Like it was birds first and then the beasts of the land. And now we have beasts of the land and then birds. Like what is going on here? Did they not read page 1? And brought them to the human to see what he would call them. And whatever the human called every living being, that was its name. And so what did I say earlier about names? What does it mean that the human is naming all these animals? He has authority over them. He gets to have names. He doesn't, and they don't have a say in it. Like that, their name is their name. Like that's what that says, and it was their name. It's not like any animal was able to say, "No, I'm not going to take that name. That stinks. I don't want to be a camel." Like, too bad, camel. You're a camel. And so, the human gave names to all livestock and to the birds of the sky and to every beast of the field. But for humanity, there was not found a helper to match him. Wah, wah. So, what does that mean, a helper to match him? So, like what the picture that's being described in the language there in the Hebrew is not just like a helper, like a sidekick. What it's describing is someone who is his equal, but who is oriented in a different direction. And almost like, not to be corny, but like a partner who can complete what is lacking, who can give him a perspective that he doesn't have. Like it's like this picture of like two 2x4s, like leaning against one another and just like same length, right? And leaning at the same angle so that they're equal but opposites. And together they're actually holding each other up. If you pull either one off, the other one falls down. Like they need each other in order to stay upright. That's what's being described here. And apparently, the animals and the birds and all that, like they're all great, but none of them can fill this role for humanity. Animals are awesome, but they're not going to complete you. Okay, so what's God going to do now? And why did God do that? Like, like, do you ever think about like what happens next? Like when you, and it's not good that the human should be alone. I'll make him a helper to match him. Like, what would you expect to happen right after that, based on everything we've seen from this God? There's a woman, right? That's what you would expect. Why go through the farce? Did God really think that we were going to be like, oh, this dog, he completes me. I don't know, this cat, I don't need anything else, thanks God. Just give me more of them. No, like why does God do this? Like that's a serious question, and the author wants us to ask that question. Why does God go through this process? Because who is this for? Who is this performance? Who is it for? The benefit of? God's apparently trying to teach the man something by having him first have to go through this long, I'm sure tedious process of meeting and naming all the animals before he gives him woman. There's something that he wants him to understand about himself, I think. But we'll see. So this is what God does. And how would you expect him to have made the woman? Same, like I would have expected, like, okay, and he goes back in the dirt because that's what he just did, right? He went back to the dirt to make the animals for the purpose of making a helper to match him. So we'd expect, okay, well that didn't work. Let me give another shot. Let me make something. Ta-da! And breathed into her nostrils the same, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't do that. Instead, he causes the human to go into a deep sleep, which deep sleep means like he looks like he's dead. And then he pierces his side, and he takes out one of his ribs and closes it back up, which is good. I would hate to wake up from that and it's like, ah. And I also wonder how long it took before he realizes, hey, did I have one more rib? But he takes something from him, and then it says like he built it. He built it into a woman and then brought her to the human. And so there's just something about that whatever, like how God made someone to be, we say, Adam or Adam, but his name is humanity. To make humanity a helper to match him, he had to take something first out of him and take that something and build up from that seed into a whole new person. And that's really what the human needed. And again, because this is really profound and we could just read right past it, we get another poem. And this poem actually comes from the mouth of the human. And he says, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man." And that's Ish and Isha in Hebrew. And so they're literally like man and out of man is what's being communicated there. And so this is the, like, wow, did you get what God just did here and why this is so profound? Let me give you a little poem so you stop and think about this. And then the narrator, as if that's not enough, says, and by the way, guys, here's a little commentary for you, dear reader. This is the reason, by the way. This is why a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his woman, and they become one flesh. This is the reason. Does that make sense to you? Yeah.
So I was wondering this earlier, the earlier poem that talked about God making man in his image,
Mm-hmm.
and then repeating it again in the poem, in his image he created him,
Mm-hmm.
and then man and woman he created them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same type of idea of man and woman being one? That's why it refers to him as him?
Yeah.
and them?
Oh, yeah. Because what that's doing is called, that style of poetry, or what's happening in poetry is called parallelism. So what the poet is saying is, in the image of God, he created them. Him, male and female, he created them. It's saying those two sentences are the same sentence. Wrap your brain around that. Like that's what the poet's saying, because I want you to think about that. They look like two separate pictures. They're the same picture. They're the same picture. And what he's saying here is there's something like, what does that mean, leave his mother and father? Like, that's weird. Like think about it. Like, actually think of it like a real person reading this. That's not what happens. It's the woman that leaves her family and joins her husband. The man doesn't leave his mom and dad to go join his wife? Does he? What's going on there? Like, this is like puzzling. And so you have to think about, the clue is in the poem. And the clue is this, my bones and my bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. What do you and your parents have in common? At just the most basic level. You share the same DNA. Whether you like it or not, your biological parents, you have their DNA. So sorry. Right? You are literally bone and flesh of your parents. That's actually a very special connection. That creates the potential for a kind of intimacy between parent and child that's different than your relationship with almost anybody else on the planet, except for one other relationship. There's only one other relationship that has a greater level of intimacy than that between parent and child, and it is between husband and wife. Because as much as you might get along with your parents because they're just like you, or not get along with them because they're just like you, in man and woman, there's a coming together and a unity and a oneness that you can never have with your parents or with your children. And this story of how God, like, it's so intentional by God that he's taken her out of him, which means that whatever qualities she has were once his, but no longer. They have been removed. Something has been removed from the man. And the only way he can recapture it is to come together with her. Like, he will never be all that he can be without what's missing from him that's in the feminine human. That the woman has characteristics and qualities that are part of God's image, that reflect and represent the character and nature of God that he actually lacks and is incomplete without her and her perspective, which is equal and as valuable as his, but is oriented differently. And it's the two together becoming one that now becomes how they together represent God, how they are one and yet not one at the same time, just like God. Well, that's really cool. What could possibly mess this story up? Because right now it just seems fantastic. Like, this is all good, and now they're one and they're two, and that's going to be so great, and they're going to multiply, and they're going to fill this temple world with many human temples of God, and God's living with them, and like everything is great. And they have authority, and they're serving, and all of this, and now we get, dun dun dun, the problem. Okay. And so the human and his woman, and that's just like, there's no word for wife. It's just his woman. That's what that is. So and it's not like possessive, like we think, oh, his woman. Like, there's no connotation in the language like he possesses her. It's just that she belongs to him. And if she was the object of the sentence, it would be, the female human and her man. And later you'll see that he gets called her man, like he belongs to her. They were both naked. That's good information, I guess. And they were not ashamed. That's great. Good for them. But the serpent was more clever, and this is again where it's, I wish there was a better way to translate. Was more clever than any other beast of the field that Yahweh God had made. Now, this is not obvious at all. So this word naked and this word clever, they're the same word. It can mean both of those things. So were the human and women, they were both clever and they were not ashamed? Well, no, that probably means naked, because that's why it says they weren't ashamed. We'd need to know that fact, right? But was the serpent more naked than any other beast? Well, based on what happens next, I would say he's more clever. But do you see that what the writer can do in Hebrew that you can't do in other languages is they can draw that there's this really interesting connection that he's making with the language between the serpent and the humans. They have something in common. And as we go on and see the rest of the story, we're going to find they have a lot more in common than we would think at first glance in just sort of imagining this. And by the way, so I have to say this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Serpent, nachash in Hebrew. What else can that mean? Well, it can mean a serpent like a snake. Totally means that. It can also mean someone who is snake-like, like deceptive, sneaky, tricky. Can mean that. You could call someone a serpent and have it mean that. It can also mean like a luminous being or like a supernatural being or an angelic being. It can mean that too. So which one does it mean? Yes, is the right answer. Right. As we'll see, like at this point, because it says of the other beasts of the field, and that's like totally calling us back. The only other time we see that is way back here, every other beast of the field. See that? So we're meant to we're meant to at least start off imagining this. The author wants us to start there. But then as we go on and we think about the story, we'll say, wait a minute, is there more going on than just that? And I think it's not a either or. I think it's a both and. So anyway, so the serpent shows up. He's really clever and maybe really naked. And he says to the woman, though God said, you shall not eat of the tree in the garden. And then like he's literally in mid-sentence, like how it's and your translations try to fix it because the Hebrew looks wrong, but I don't think it's wrong. I think it's trying to communicate. He was in the middle of speaking and she interrupts him. But the woman said to the serpent, whoa, dude, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Okay, so let's take this apart. First of all, my first question is, finish the sentence, what was he going to say? Though God said, or even though God said, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden, ... What? Finish the sentence. So what? Right? Yeah, I know God said that, but come on. What is he getting at? Well, let's hold that. But let's pay attention a moment to what the woman says. So she's relating to the serpent those two commandments that we got earlier from God that we just talked about. And you notice, listen to how she rephrases what God said. Now, what did God actually say? Do we need to go back? Yeah, here we go. Yeah, you may surely eat. You may eat is what that means. And then he really says you can eat, really eat of every tree of the garden. But the tree of discernment of good and bad, you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. And so let's look at what she says. Yeah, we can eat of the fruit of the trees. Like it's kind of like God was really emphatic. Like God, you could almost see the exclamation points in what God said. Like he's excited for them. Like, wow, you get to eat all this great stuff. And she's kind of like, yeah, there's some trees, some fruit. We can kind of eat it. But you notice, but you all shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And she doesn't say die like God did. She's like, lest you die means you might die. Maybe. Yeah. I know, that's where I was going to go next. And it's in the midst. But so for the woman, this tree in her mind sits in the middle of the garden. What does that mean as far as her geographic compass? That's where the tree of life is. So is she confused? Does she think she's not allowed to touch the tree of life? Or in her mind, the tree of life is not the center? This tree has become the center. Why would the tree become the center for her? Maybe she's been thinking about this tree for a while. And the more we think about something, and then it suddenly becomes the center of our world. For her, this tree of knowledge or this tree of discernment is the center of her world. And everything else seems small right? Like eating of the rest of the trees, But this tree, like she minimizes the good that God has given. And she like over like to the extreme, like you can't even touch it. God didn't say that. Like the negative has become so big in her mind and the positive has become so small. And then the consequences, she's minimized the consequences for breaking it. Because God said if you eat it, you're definitely going to die. And she says if we eat it or touch it, we might die, maybe. And man, I'd like to find out. Like you can almost see the implication there, right? Do we ever do that? Do we ever do that? We look at the things that God has said, this is forbidden to you. Like, don't go there. Don't get involved in that thing. And we make that in like the center, my whole world is defined by my struggle with this thing. And saying no to this thing. And saying no to this thing has become like this giant mountain in the center of my world. And everything I do is just walking around this mountain thinking, I know I shouldn't go there. I know I shouldn't. Like, and that's everything. Meanwhile, God has made this paradise of existence and life with him that he wants, like don't even think about that. Like, it's not even in the center. It's somewhere off in the suburbs of Eden, you know? Like, come be with me here. But we've minimized, God's okay, being with God and time with God is fine. But man, the draw. And if I did do it, if I did give in, maybe it would be bad, but maybe it'd be okay. Maybe I'd survive it. So you can see that already, like obviously the serpent is really clever. Like he's chosen his timing. Like this is the moment. Like he's maybe been watching her for a while. And he sees how she's drawn already. And she just needs a little push. Just a little push. He's going to help her out. He's going to help her out. And something else, a question we should be asking as we're thinking about this story. What is the serpent's motivation? We're told that he's clever. But that's not a motivation. That's just an attribute. He's not good. Yeah. But why? Like, we tend to imagine this story and think, the devil in a red suit with horns and a pitchfork, right? And he's just evil because, for the kicks of being evil, right? But the biblical story is not so simplistic and cartoonish. Like, these characters have real motivations. And, yeah, but why? Why would he want to do that? And yeah, it was true, because the last time we saw that, the beasts of the field, who was getting authority over all of them? Yeah. And what happened to all the beasts of the field? Each one of them had to do what? They had to be evaluated by who? By humanity, by Adam, right? They all got inspected by Adam, and they were found wanting. Sorry, you're not good enough to be my partner. Oh, maybe somebody felt a little sting from that rejection. And says, well, guess what, friend? Let me just show you what I can do. Let me show you what I can do. And actually what some of the, there's a whole midrash, or there's a Jewish like commentary on this story that it's not part of the Bible, and so don't have to accept that this is the reason, but this just shows you how people over the years have read this story and thought about it, that they said that the motive, what the serpent's plan was, it didn't go according to plan, but what the serpent's plan was to get the woman to give the man the fruit, let him eat it, he's going to die, and then he'll take his place and be her husband. And they'll rule the world together. That's his plan. That he wants to, but the idea, the basic idea though, is that he's here because he wants to replace the man. And he wants to show that he can be a better man than the man. What? What is going on? But he's a serpent. But we'll see, he's a serpent, but he's also more than a serpent. Okay. But we don't know that yet. Yeah. Yes. Sure. Take 5 minutes to grab a refresher.